Morning. I was thinking last night, if I ask who has read John 11, or how would I get more people to raise their hands if I ask who has read John 11, or if I ask who hasn't read John 11? If you haven't read it, then you have extra homework today. Read chapter 12 as well. Apparently there's 57 verses, I was told. Open with me to John 11. We're not going to read all of it. You'll be glad to hear. We just read a few verses to remind us of what happened. So, starting at chapter 11, verse 1. I'm reading from the ESV. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through him. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. After this, he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus talks to them a little bit, and in verse 13, he said, he tells them in verse 11, after saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sakes I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us go that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. Then verse 38, when Jesus, deeply moved, again came to the tomb, it was a cave and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out, his hands and his feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Amen. Let's pray that God would bless his word to us this morning. As I was thinking about this passage, about this account, this true story, it just hit me that verse, and I remember that verse from Isaiah 55:8, where God says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Because everywhere we look in this passage, God is doing something else than what the disciples think. This is a time when their confidence in Jesus starts to wane, when he gets quite low in their estimation. You know, maybe you think that Jesus had a great ministry, and then towards the end of his ministry, the Pharisees and so on get jealous and try to put him to death. But if you read the accounts of the gospel, his life was constantly in danger. From the time that he goes to Nazareth and they try to throw him off the cliff, and in John, if you read from earlier, from chapter 8, chapter 10, he talks to them, he gives them these I am statements, that he is one with God. And we read, they picked up stones, they tried to seize him. And then later on we read, they picked up stones again to stone him and kill him. And then again we read that they tried to arrest him. So Jesus leaves from one place to another to escape. And they leave the Jerusalem area before the Passover, and they go beyond the Jordan. That's where they are now, baptizing. And we are told that many believed in him there. But the disciples start to believe that Jesus is running away. They lose their confidence. Word comes to Jesus, as we read, that Lazarus is sick, and Jesus gives a prophecy at that point, as soon as he hears, and he says, the sickness will not end in death. But then, strangely, he deliberately delays for 2 days longer in the place where he was. The disciples were watching all this. And then after 2 days, he gives another word of knowledge. He says to them, Lazarus has died, and for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there. I bet when Jesus prophesied that the sickness will not end in death, they didn't expect that 2 days later Jesus would say that Lazarus has died. And as he tells them that they have to go there, the disciples start expressing their belief that maybe he doesn't have a clue what he's doing. Verse 8 says, just now the Jews were seeking to stone you, and are you thinking to go there again? Have you forgotten? Do you not know what you're doing? And then verse 16, Jesus talks to them, and he says, it's for your sakes and all this. And Thomas says, guys, I know what's going on. You know, we'll go there, we're going to die, but let's go anyway. And all the time Jesus was working in the perfect timing of God. I try to imagine this from Lazarus' perspective. Twice it's mentioned that Jesus loved Lazarus and his sisters, and the people knew it. Mary and Martha. Mary was the one from whom 7 demons were cast out. And Jesus often stayed at their house. It was his place, and people knew that Jesus loved them. What happened was not that uncommon. You know, it's not unusual for someone to get sick and die in 3 days. Imagine life before antibiotics. I often think about it and shudder. You know, I would... don't know how many of us would still be here. I don't know if I would still be here, looking back at, you know, chest infections we had before and things like that. But as he was getting ill, he thought that he was going to be okay. Because now they had Jesus, and he thought, surely He's our friend, he would make an effort to come. Or they heard that he could just give a word and the person could get better. And he waited and waited until it was too late. And sometimes I think we feel that at our times when we feel we need God in our lives, that he waits. Maybe the people they sent already returned and they told them, we said that Lazarus was ill and it didn't seem that he was going to do anything, and he just stayed. And I wonder if in his last moments, Lazarus and his sisters who were watching him die thought that maybe God had let him down. When he meets Martha and Mary, you can sense the disappointment at what they perceive to be his failure. They both say the exact same thing. Lord, if you had been here, Lazarus would not have died. Clearly they talked about it, and you can hear a bit of the reproach and the resentment in their voices. If you had been here, but now you turn up 4 days too late, you're supposed to be a prophet. Did you not know that he was going to die? You healed everyone else up and down the country, and now you turn up 4 days too late, and the crowd says the same things. The crowd is very disrespectful if you know Middle Eastern culture. They question him publicly, and they say that this is the guy who opened the eyes of the blind. Could he not have healed this man? There's a harsh disappointment at his failure and turning up too late. And Jesus was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled at all this unbelief by his closest friends. And we have that shortest verse in the Bible, that he was troubled in his spirit. Twice we are told that. And we have the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. And some, I think, misinterpret as saying that, you see here, we see Jesus, a human nature, and definitely he had compassion and love for people and felt deeply with people, but he's not crying here because of grief, he's crying because of their unbelief. As all this was happening, God's perspective was higher. Secondly, God's priorities are higher. God was working for them. God was working through them. And this is connected with the greatest plan that God ever had, the plan of redemption. God's priority was the good of those who love him and his purposes for them. We read in Romans chapter 8, from verse 27, that he who searches the hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And I was sometimes tempted to read this, that all things will be good for me because I love God. That God maybe promised that everything will be hunky-dory in my life at all times. But without going to preach from another passage, this passage is saying that God, all things, not that all things will be good, but that the sum of all things will be for the good. And God is working at that in his purpose. And also notice the plural, not for me, but for those who are called according to his purpose. A group of people. And it struck me that, and it's so good when you see it, that when God blesses somebody, it's not a blessing for them and a curse to someone else. When God blesses, it's a blessing in all direction, in all ramifications. To give you a quick example, there's a tragic story that I hear the world over, and it's true. I heard it in Romania, I heard it over here, I'm hearing it from America, of the family, the parents who came up from nothing and now they have everything, and they have one son, and they give everything they can to their son to make him happy, for him to not suffer the one that they lived in, and so on. And on his 18th birthday, they buy him a brand new sports car. They're trying to bless him, and it doesn't last the week or the month or the year. And he maybe takes out friends with him, maybe takes out the people that are coming the other way, and it's a blessing. It was a blessing to him, but it was a curse in other directions. God doesn't do that. When God blesses somebody, he blesses in every way. The second thing that struck me was that God's priority is not our comfort. There's an expression in Romania that says everyone always tries to pull the fire under their own pot. We try to pull the fire under our own pot all the time. But we live with the idea that hardship is evil and prosperity is good. And when things don't go as expected, we think that something has gone wrong. God has lost grip on things. And I was reading through Jeremiah in my Bible reading these past days. And God says to them, in your prosperity I spoke to you, and you didn't listen. And in their prosperity, they forgot God. They turned to vanity and idols. They started worshipping fertility gods related to humans, but also crops. And they ended up in physical and spiritual immorality. And they ended up under God's wrath. And then as a correction, God allows for difficulties to come in their lives, and they fail to see it. He says, did you not see? Your vineyard gave a small bucket of wine. You sowed 220 liters of seed, and you reaped 20 liters. Did you not consider why this was happening? And God, in the end, they have to go into exile. So in his love, God allows testing, trials, illness, tribulation, to achieve his purposes in us and in the world. And God, for Lazarus and his sister, God allows for their comfort to be disrupted so he can work in them. And maybe even more importantly, through them in the world. God's priorities are higher. And then thirdly, God's purposes are higher. In all this chaos, God is working to reveal Jesus as the Son of God. Colossians 2:9 says that in him the fullness of the deity dwells bodily. God wanted to reveal Jesus as the one who has authority and power over life and death. And at his word, the dead can come back to life. And Jesus constantly tells them there is a greater purpose for all this. But they don't seem to hear. John 11:4 says it is for the glory, when he says this illness does not lead to death, it is for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. His purpose was the glory of God, the glory of the Son of God. God's purpose was a new revelation of Jesus. It gets to a point where we understand that God wanted Lazarus dead, and he wanted him dead good. Like not half dead, not recently deceased. There was a Jewish belief that the spirit of a person hung around their body for 3 days after they passed away, and that it was possible for them to wake up after they thought they were dead. They would have seen cases of people fainting or going unconscious and so on and coming back. But they thought that after 4 days, somebody doesn't wake up, that's it. It's impossible after 4 days for someone to recover. So God wanted them to know that Lazarus was dead beyond a shadow of doubt. God wanted Lazarus to get to the point where he was beyond hope, and if anyone was able to help him, that would be God alone. Now, do you know what the name of Lazarus means? Lazarus is the English transliteration of the Greek, and the Greek transliterates the Hebrew name Eliezer, and it means helped by God. His name means helped by God, and there are a few other interesting characters in the Bible who are called Eliezer. And as I was reading through my Bible reading, I ended up in Psalm 54, and verse 4 says, "Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life." And I thought, ooh, that's interesting, because I just read this. And looking in the original text, I thought, I wonder how this is said. And it says, "Behold, Elohim is my helper," which can get contracted to Eli. So it's saying, "Behold, Lazarus. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life." They were about to see a measure of the glory of God that they couldn't see unless he died. They've seen and known Jesus who could heal the sick and walk on water and all those different things. But now they needed to see Jesus who could raise the long dead. God's purpose in all this was the disciples' faith. Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus has died, and for your sakes I am glad that I was not there, that you may believe." That's in verse 15. So again it gets to that point when Lazarus has died, and Jesus says, "I rejoice for your sakes," because he's going to lead to you believing. In our troubles we despair, and we get to the end of the road where we think we are beyond help, and humanly speaking, we may be beyond help. And Jesus may be looking at it and saying, "Oh, I'm glad that you got to this point in your life, because of the faith that you will come when I come through for you, and I do the impossible for you." Jesus was just about to blow open their understanding of who he was. Even every now and then they were standing on the shoreline of their faith. This is what we believe. We can't go any further. And Jesus opens up new ground. There's moments like this in the gospel. When the storm is stilled, they look at Jesus and they fell silent, and they said they were afraid. And they said, "Who is this man who can even command the waves and the sea?" And now, again, they're in that point where they're going to get a new revelation of Jesus. And there was one particular disciple whose faith Jesus, or who we are told about, that Jesus challenges and he grows her faith. And it's Martha. It's the first conversation. As he goes up to the village where this happened, he meets Martha and he says, "Lord, if you had been here. But I still believe that God gives you whatever you ask." Now, she doesn't mean, for a long time I thought she meant, she believes what he's going to do. But she's not talking about that. What she's saying is, "Lord, I still believe in you. You didn't do it for us, but I still believe you're genuine. You're a real prophet. You're someone who could do something about it. I still believe you're the Messiah. It's okay." But Jesus immediately stretches her statement with a promise. He says to her, "Your brother will rise again." I love that. Do you know that God stretches faith with promises? That a promise can be God's stretching device? I'm thinking of all the people in the Bible who carried a big promise for a long time. People like Abraham and literally every person in the Bible, before it was fulfilled against all human expectations. And Jesus says, do you believe in me? Here's a promise for you to carry with you. And then welcome to a world where there's no indication whatsoever that that promise will ever be fulfilled. Until God does it. For Martha, all this happens very quickly, and she deflects with a theologically correct answer. Her answer is, I know that he will come back to life in the resurrection in the last day. I believe I know the correct belief about that. And then we get to that amazing statement, one of the 7 I am statements in John. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Jesus says. He also stretches faith with new revelation. Do you believe this? She takes what she believes and expands it further. What if I told you that resurrection itself is a person and not an event? That those who believe in me will live and will never die because of me and who I am and what I do. Her mind really cannot compute, but she makes that beautiful confession, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, or the Anointed One, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. So Jesus had been talking to the disciples, but they hearing what he's saying, but it doesn't kick in until they come to the grave. And Jesus says, remove the stone. And again, Martha interjects, Lord, what are you doing? He'd been telling them that he was going to do it, but he never registered. She believed that God could do it, but not that necessarily that he would do it, that he would do something, and not right now. He might do it sometime. But only in the midst of this tragedy, like right there at the entrance to the tomb, is that their faith is transformed. Jesus says, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And then, of course, another purpose was the crowd that was standing around. And Jesus says, I don't need to pray, but I'm praying on account of this crowd so that they may believe that you sent me. And at the same time, as I mentioned, beyond all of this that God was working, there was something else, something much bigger, much more important. The raising of Lazarus triggered the events that lead to the crucifixion of Jesus. God's purpose in this was greater still. You know, if you are saved by the blood of Jesus this morning, and I pray that you are, Lazarus getting sick was what kicked off Jesus being caught and Jesus being crucified. As they were getting imminently close to God fulfilling his greatest plan, Lazarus gets sick and dies. And I was reading through Isaiah again recently, and I want to read this from a different translation, Isaiah 49. I believe Lazarus is mentioned in Isaiah. It's a beautiful prophetic part of the Bible, Isaiah 49, verse 8. Yahweh says, in an acceptable time I have answered you, and in a day of salvation I have helped you. I will preserve you and give you for a covenant of the people, this is talking about Jesus, the Messiah, to raise up the land, to make them inherit the desolate's heritage, saying to those who are bound, come out, and to those who are in darkness, show yourselves. It almost quotes the words of Jesus that he says to Lazarus at the tomb. He comes out bound, and he tells him, Lazarus, come out. And he comes out of the darkness of the tomb. God will tell me if my interpretation of that is correct when I get there. So the raising of Lazarus causes this widespread faith from that point on, and also widespread hatred and persecution. And it seems these two go closely together. So if you open John 11, you want to follow with me to show you a couple of things. From verse 45, it says, Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away our place, and so on. And then the last verse, 53. So from that day, they made plans to put him to death. Here is Jesus doing the greatest miracle that he did up to this point. And on that day, his fate is sealed. They decide that they are definitely putting him to death. And then in chapter 12, verse 9, we read that 6 days later, Jesus comes to Lazarus' house again for a party. A large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, and they came not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. So Jesus' fate is sealed. Lazarus' fate, they're now seeking to kill him again. And then on the next day, John 12, verse 12, the large crowd that had come to the feast heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, so they took palm branches. And they went on to meet him, crying out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. Verse 17, the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to bear witness. The reason why the crowd went to meet him, John says, was that they heard that he had done this sign. So the Pharisees said to one another, you see, you are gaining nothing. The whole world has gone after him. The raising of Lazarus causes the triumphal entry. I don't know if you noticed that before. So it's absolutely incredibly important in the plan of what God is working. All they had to do, the disciples, those who loved Jesus and whom Jesus loved, was to trust, to be patient, to listen to what Jesus was saying, to watch what he will do. Instead, all they could see and say was that God has lost control of the situation. God let me down. Jesus has forgotten about me. Jesus doesn't know what he's doing. That, Jesus' promises, they don't seem likely that they will come to pass. And there's a sad contrast between the disciples and what God was doing, and no wonder we have that verse, Jesus cried. Lastly, and we're coming to an end, this whole thing that happens and what God is working in their lives is about faith. And my last thought was God's power is higher, that God has the power to fulfill his word. God allows trials to bring us to the edge of our faith, like who we believe God is and what we believe that God can do. And that's fine. Sometimes God confronts us with it. God brings us to a place where we we realize that these are the limits of my faith. And we're standing there, toes over the edge, and we have the promises of God that He can do more. And we have the two choices, is to turn back and give up, or to go forward and step in faith. Because God brought us there, ready to open new land for us to walk in faith on, to walk forward. God has the power that created this universe, working to fulfill His word. And we are called to this faith, to believe in it. This is what Jesus is doing here. My notes just went. Okay. If God makes a promise, though everything points to the opposite, God will do it. None of the people in Lazarus' account yet had the faith to believe what Jesus was encouraging them to believe in Him and to believe in God. But there was a man in the Bible who, at the end of his life, gave evidence of having this kind of faith, and it's our spiritual father, Abraham. Paul constantly says, Abraham is the father of all who believe. And this is not just this is not just Paul's idea. It's actually mentioned in Isaiah 51, verse 1. He says, "Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness, you who seek Yahweh. Look to the rock you were cut from and to the quarry you were dug from. Look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah who bore you. For when he was but one, I called him and blessed him and made him many." A faith that is godly is a faith like Abraham's. And I thought about that, reading Hebrews 11:17, where he talks about in that by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, he offered up Isaac. And he who has received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered God was even able to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, He did receive him back. So maybe as you read Genesis, the account in Genesis, you think that when God asked Abraham to offer up Isaac, that maybe Abraham thought that God is able to give him another promised child, because He had already given him one. But the writer to the Hebrew understand no, because God made promises about Isaac. So God asked him to sacrifice the answer to the promise that Isaac still had, that in Isaac will the nations be blessed. There is no way you can believe God who made promises about Isaac and obey God who asked for the sacrifice of Isaac unless you believe in the resurrection. And this was the faith of Abraham. He believed God no matter what. He obeyed God no matter what. And he obtained the fulfillment of those promises. And if God makes a promise, even if God asks you or me, like Abraham, to sacrifice the fulfillment of the promise itself, He will bring it back. He will bring it or you back from the grave to fulfill it, because God's word cannot be broken. The moment God breaks a promise, He stops being God. When Jesus said this illness does not end in death, it did not. Even when Lazarus died, it seemed that the promise was broken. He brought Lazarus back from the dead. I don't know what promise God made you, but He will surely keep it. If God spoke a word to you, He will surely keep His word. You can trust God. And I'm finishing. You'll be glad to hear. And you remember that passage I started with in Isaiah 55, your thoughts are not my thoughts, your ways are not my ways. It goes on in verse 10 of Isaiah 55. It says, as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose and succeed in the thing for which I sent it. Here's an illustration we understand. Here in Scotland, I think we are experts in many things, but one of them is the rain. People elsewhere in the world, the rain maybe still holds mysteries for them, but not for us. And God says, you don't know my ways are higher, my thoughts are higher, but learn from the rain, because it is like my word. When it comes, it has an effect. It has a blessing it achieves. It doesn't immediately jump right up. It goes in the ground. It goes in the plants. It grows that plant. And the bread you ate this morning was because God sent rain. Maybe you've been watching one of the popular farming shows, and you've seen that they can't take up the harvest until the moisture is below a certain level. Now, some people are looking at me as like we don't have to watch a show, we are the show. We have people who are actually farming. They have to wait until the rain comes out of the plant before it can be harvested, and it gives blessing afterwards in the food that it makes and the seed for next time. God says, this is my word. You can trust it, and when I send my word, it achieves its purpose. Amen.